Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey and you're welcome to The Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. On this week's episode, I am joined by Aidan Lawless, farm manager at Johnstown Castle, to get an update on the performance of the herd. Aidan gives tips and advice on drying off high-yielding cows, insights on cumulative production in the winter milk cows, their recovery from drought, and how they aim to rebuild their silage reserve.
Yeah, Emma-Louise, sure, things are going well at the moment for the last few weeks. Things have settled down well. Grass is booming at the moment, and I suppose we're coming into the sort of end of lactation there with the autumn herd at the moment, so it's a quieter time of the year on the farm for us here now. So we'd have a good lot of autumn calvers on the farm here, so it's a bit quieter.
And you mentioned grass is booming, Aidan. Can you quantify that in terms of, I suppose, average grass growth across the last few weeks, and also looking at the farm cover per cow?
Yeah. So I suppose for the last 3 weeks, really, we've probably grown maybe 75, 80 kilos a day, or maybe a bit over it at times, depending. We've been taking out some surpluses as well, so that sort of drops back. We would have recorded covers of 130, 140 on some plots where there is good grass. So that's really for the last. It's sort of for the last 3 weeks. It's probably the best growth we've had all year, really, because we missed the peak earlier and the drought was there in May and June. Our cover per cow then, well, we're adjusting the whole time. Nearly every week we measure at the moment. Our demand on the autumn herd has dropped off now because we dried off just over 50% of the herd there only a couple of days ago, and even the week before that we were trying to drop demand on that herd anyway. So our covers per cow were actually over 200, but we will be adjusting that. We let the covers go a little heavier when we're drying off the autumn herd, just because we want the dry cows to sort of to try clean out a little bit of a heavier cover, just to knock the yield off and before they dry off. So we've no shortage of grass at the moment. We have a bit of catching up to do in terms of sort of silage made for the year. So we'll try to push on and take as much surpluses as we can. We have our first and second cup made, but a bit less than what we would have maybe normally. And
looking back to the dreaded drought that we all experienced, I suppose you got hit hardest, Aidan, or one of the hardest counties. You know, we would have been speaking with a dairy advisor, Colm Doran, and he would have talked about the extent of it in Wexford. But what sort of growths were you seeing when you had the extremes of the drought?
Yeah, I suppose we weren't the worst affected. Maybe there was actually a little pocket of just the very southeast that did get rain there. I think in a certain amount of rain in May that other farms wouldn't have got. But like we were, I suppose, for the last 2 weeks of May and the first 2 weaks of June, we were coming into a fairly serious drought where our soil moisture efforts were up at 65, 70, and but it was sort of probably a bit shorter than maybe some farms around the county. It was very localised actually, because even when the rain came, I know there was certain farmers that didn't get it until a week later than we did as well. So I think overall, sort of our rainfall for June came in at 90 millimetres, which was higher than average, ironically, but there was about 50 or 60 mil of that came, and I think around the 20th to June, the 18th, 20th to June. So it was the first half of June and the last couple of weeks of May where we really suffered, and our growth rates there was some paddocks actually lost grass when we would have been measuring weekly there for the first week or two of June. And our growth rates probably would have been between maybe 15 to 20 on some, where we would have been expecting covers or growth rates of 75, 80 that time of the year, really. Yeah, you'd comfortably grow that in a normal time. But like I said, it was short-lived enough for a few weeks there, so yeah.
And Aidan, when we spoke in the springtime, you had given us some information on the clover and mixed species swards that you would have introduced into the dairy grazing platform. And I suppose a comment from you, did you see any, I suppose, differing effects with perennial ryegrass and clover, or the mixed species, in terms of how they managed and coped with the drought?
Very little so far. It's early days. I suppose we'll have to look back at it when we've been taking measurements and all. But to be fair, our growth rates seem to dip a little bit on the multi-species as well during the drought, and that would have been one of the sort of the factors that you would have thought the multi-species would have survived. Now, it probably maybe did come out of the drought a little quicker, but then we got a lot of rain quick, and both systems came out of the drought quick enough. that was at a period of time there where I suppose we've only spread 70 kilos of nitrogen on the multi-species so far, and it hasn't got any nitrogen for the last 2.5 months. So it might have been just at that period where there was a changeover. Really, the clover hadn't really kicked in at that stage yet either, so there might have been a little bit of a dip. It's early days to say yet, but we wouldn't have seen a huge difference in terms of drought resistance, which would have been one of the factors that would have been a plus point for the multi-species.
It'll be interesting to see, Aidan, in the next couple of years if that does materialise in terms of the coping to periods where there is soil moisture deficit. Where you've spread 70 kilos of nitrogen on the mixed species, what level of nitrogen fertiliser has been spread on the perennial ryegrass type swords?
Yeah, well, with the other system, because we're up on about 100 and I think about 180 kilos of N, like where our target will be to sort of go near the 250, just to have that range to compare with. So we'll have 2 more applications of nitrogen to go on there. I suppose we'll have one there in I suppose 20th of August, maybe 20th of August, and then the final application before the closing date there in early September. And then we blanket spread here with the protected area generally every 3 weeks or so. We'll sort of probably go a little slightly over 3 weeks this time, and then we'll have, like I said, we'll have the 2 more applications to go on. That'll bring us up close enough to 240 kgs and then 240, 250 kgs then on the perennial ryegrass, clover swords, and then the multi-species. We still have the option. We'll measure how those are going. It's really the first full grazing season, but they're performing well at the moment, but then everything is growing well at the moment. So if we do need to think that we need to put on some nitrogen there just before towards the back end, we have an application. Our target there would be to spread less than 100 kgs of N per hectare. So we do still have 25 or 30 kgs of N that we spread on that system if we do need to. But it's early days with that. We'll see how it goes.
And if we turn our attention then to the herds and the performance of the different herds on the farm in Johnstown Castle. So I suppose we're particularly interested when we chat to you, farmers that are engaging in autumn calving and winter milking. So I suppose to start at that point, Aidan, you mentioned 50% of the herd is dried off at this stage. So I guess we have a good indication of cumulative performance for the year. Could you give us an idea of milk yield and milk solids yield from those cows?
Yeah, so we have about 5 herds here in Johnstown overall, but 2 of the herds are autumn calving herds, and their pastures are predominantly perennial ryegrass with some clover in them. So and they all graze independently. So there's 2 different stock rates on the autumn herds. We have a high stock and 4 cows per hectare, and then a 2.75 cows per hectare. Normally, any of the updates that we send out is just focused on the intents of the 4 cows per hectare. So just the performance on that, like I said, we've actually slightly over 50% of the cows dried on their herd at the moment. Which aim to dry just in really 2 batches, I think, this year, because a lot of our herd is sort of fairly compact in terms of calving. So anything basically calving, our expected calving date there is the 20th of September. And from the 20th of September until, I suppose, the 10th of October, we've dried there over the last couple of days. And that's the performance to date. Then we're looking at, we're just about 295 days of milk, almost up into 300. We've done about 7,350 kilos of milk. Our solids are just over 600 kilos of solids per cow at the moment. We'd be hoping to get another maybe 20 kilos out of the other half of the herd. That's sort of for the next, they'll be milking on for the next month or so. And they should do about another 20 kilos. So the recorded yield will be around 620, and I suppose delivered to the factory then it'll be around 600 per cow. Now that's off a pretty high feeding rate, a bit higher than normal. Our target will be to maybe about 1.4 tonne of concentrate. This year it's going to be 1.6, at least 1.6. And that extra 250 kilos of concentrate was really fed in May, June there during the drought period. We're feeding 4 or 5 kilos a day for the guts of a month, I suppose, really.
And I guess that 4 cows per hectare stocking rate, is quite intensive. And, where we hit something like that drought that we experienced, albeit a shorter one than we saw in 2018, there is going to be a requirement for additional supplement.
Yeah, you're walking a tightrope with that the whole time, Emma-Louise, I suppose. And, there's an extra requirement. We fed silage off a system that we wouldn't really have silage to feed on the system either. We fed, along with the 4 or 5 kilos of concentrate we were feeding for a good period of that month, we were feeding about 4 or 5 kilos of silage as well. So we probably only have about maybe about 0.3, 0.2 or 0.3 of a ton of silage made on that system. Very little really. It's all only a surpluses anyway. So that's just a sort of like you said, the dangers any time where you're not hitting growth, you're going to be tight on the shoulders on that system anyway. But any drop in growth at all, we'd have a demand of, with 4 cows per hectare, we normally would have a demand of 65, 70 kilos a day, every day really. So, and they're out grazing. So if we're not growing less than that, we have a deficit within a couple of weeks. Yeah.
And Aidan, looking to the dry cow management, those cows would still have been pushing, a fairly strong yield when you were looking to dry them off. And I suppose, can we get a comment or some tips from you in terms of stepping down the yield in the week or so leading up to dry off? And also, as well as that, what you're doing for dry off, is it blanket or selective dry cow across those groups?
Yeah, so what we've done, it's worked well for the last few years here. I know some people might be a little bit put off with extra work, but really we're dividing the herd. So we're identifying the cows that we're going to dry off based on expected calving date, or some of them might have started to drop off and yield themselves, but mainly on expected calving date. We'd have very few that'd be below conditions go around the autumn herd anyway. But so once we've identified the cows that we want to dry off, a week to 10 days before we plan to dry them off, they're separated out into effectively what we call the sort of the go and dry group. And we've tried crash their diet really by following the milkers. So the milkers will graze pretty much 2/3 of the grazing, and the last third, the ones that we're going drying off, have to fight for that. And they'll be getting no concentrate really either then. So that can sort of knock an 18-20 litre cow back to sort of around 10 litres in the space of that week. And we'd see it even on the milking parlour there. We'll have a lot of them coming up as depressed yields warning and stuff. So it's pretty effective that they don't tend to bag up as much after. So we'll keep the diet restricted then for sort of 5-7 days after drying off. So really it's probably 2 weeks, but rather than 2 weeks after drying off, it's a week before and a week after. Just seems that they don't spring up as much or retain, because like you said, like 16, 18 litres is a lot to be drying off a cow at, but that's just, some of them have that potential and they need to be dried off to get a bit of a rest period. So in terms of the dry off, then we're targeting, regardless of the dry cow therapy, we're targeting to give them a sort of a break of about 60 days, sort of the 50-60 day dry period. Obviously some of the cows we're using a dry cow therapy, and that's a 56 weight day withdrawal anyway, so that needs to be, even the other ones we do still give them that longer period. But any cow basically that has a cell count less than 150,000 consistently for the year, or hasn't had any mastitis for the last 3 or 4 years now, we've been using selective dry cow therapy. So basically just a sealer with those, and anything else, then anyone that has had mastitis over the year or has a higher cell count will get antibiotic and dry cow or sealer as well.
And 150 is quite a high threshold, Aidan. Are you comfortable with that? I know for people starting out and dipping their toe in the water, the recommendation from Don Crowley would be to go at a much lower threshold.
Yeah, well, we started off at around 100,000 as well. Now, to be honest, anything over, when I'm selecting sort of anything under 100,000, I don't even really look at, but like anything between 100 and 150,000, I might look at, depending on if the cow is sort of an older cow, or if like possibly if there was any case of mastitis during the year, and if there's anything like that, knocks her out straight away. So that'd be, like you said, it'd be a high threshold, but and it's the first year we probably crept up maybe from 100,000. We would start at 100,000, 120. And we're just maybe pushing the boat as far as we can see how we go really with it. Now, our sort of cell count for the year has been good, but we do get incidents of mastitis probably during the winter when the cows are housed. Tends to be environmental, so there's probably 10 or 15% of the herd would have had an incident of mastitis, higher than we'd like really. But I've been looking at it for the last couple of years, and I can't see any correlation between that and the dry cow therapy. It's probably a lot of the cows that maybe were treated with an antibiotic last year, and it could be just sort of some of them that are carrying a persistently infected, and maybe we need to be a little harder on getting rid of those rather than than treating them. But so far, I'd be happy enough in terms of once now. Obviously, Don would have gone through it before as well. But the real key thing, and when we're drying off, we have plenty of help. And like a cow with 100,000 or a little over hasn't an infection, and we just need to be really important that we don't introduce it when we're drying off. So that's the real critical thing, I think. For I'd probably leading a little bit easier this time of the year during the days here, like they're going back out to a clean sward and they're coming in clean. We're obviously disinfecting them on when we're drying them off, but it's probably a little bit easier to do it with the autumn cows when they're out with pasture than even in the house.
So some of the key tips I'm taking from what you're saying there is that, you know, the management of your cows in the week or 10 days leading up to dry off in terms of crashing the diet so they can reduce the milk yield significantly. And, you know, you're looking at, you know, 10 litres is a fairly good level to be drying cows off at. You know, ensuring that there's a lot of help around when you're doing the dry off and that Selective is working quite well for you, but we must be selective in the cows we're selecting for that.
Yeah, I suppose just as well, Emma, just it's important to say like that we're sampling regularly here. We have somatic cell counts every 2 weeks here, which probably no other farmer really would have. So we can be a little bit sure, we're 100% sure that sort of there's no high cell count anytime during the, you know, if farmer, I suppose even Don would have said as well, you need to be sampling regularly as well, that you're having at least a sample every month if you're going to go down that route. I'd imagine anyway. So, but we have even more than that. So maybe we should be able to push out the boat a little bit higher, maybe with a higher threshold as well. So, yeah.
And turning our attention then to the spring herd, and the most interesting part, I think, from the spring perspective now is, you know, we're approaching scanning and seeing where we're at in terms of how well the breeding season went. Can you get a recap for us, Aidan, in terms of what your procedure was for breeding? When did you start? You know, dairy, beef, AI, and I suppose what the indications are in terms of how successful it was.
Yeah, gosh, for the spring herd, we probably would have, we started, I think, about the 2nd of May it was. We just, with between the autumn cows and all here, we just, that was really looking back over the last couple of years anyway, like sort of with the gestation length of the cows at the moment, that was sort of even to get a February calf, or now you really need to be starting it slightly later. So we were happy enough. We're getting, for the last few years, we've been getting them good and compact anyway. So we still would have a good chunk of cows calved there in first week of February, even by starting then. So our start date, we AI then for with the cows 7 weeks. I suppose with the heifers it's probably less. It was really only sort of the heifers were synchronized after 10 days. So or PG, just that they were all served within the first 10 days. So the bull would have went in. We actually left the bull in after they were all served within the first 10 days. We left the bull in for day 10 to day 18 or so, and then just when the repeats were coming on, the ones that were synchronized, we took them out and we just observed again, just from a management point of view, really. And then the bulls would have joined the spring herd after week 7 or so, when they came out from the heifers, and then we bred for another, just about 11-week breeding period there with spring. So the bulls are out there since I think about the 15th of July. Activity, we haven't scanned, and we didn't do a scan during the breeding season. Our numbers on the spring herd are a bit smaller, so it's dangerous to predict. But we've had a couple of cows that have seen bulling since, but it seems to be low enough. We did have a few cows come at the sort of 6 or 9 week sort of during the breeding period as well, but you will have that. They were probably maybe missed the first time, or just an embryonic loss maybe with one, but would be hopeful enough that sort of for the last while now, the autumn herd was actually scanned. We scanned the autumn herd earlier in the year there now, and we were about 12% empty on those, which is higher. We were down in single digits there for the last couple of years, but this is the highest one we've had for the last 2 or 3 years. But it's still okay for a sort of a tight enough 10.5 week breeding period. But we wouldn't want to go any higher than that. Ideally, for the last few years we've been going well on that. So hopefully the spring herd will be somewhere around that.
And Aidan, you make reference to your autumn breeding season length of 10.5 weeks and 11 weeks in your spring herd, and that's something we would have chatted on the podcast about in the last few weeks. You know, there's a huge range, and I suppose 10 is as low as people seem to go, but people will go to 15, 16 weeks. Did you ever have an extended breeding season, and why are you cutting it below the 12 weeks, which is generally the norm?
Yeah, well, I suppose, look, the bulls maybe tend to carry a bit like, so I suppose if we have a 10-week breeding season, we probably have a 12-week calving season really, and just from a point of view, if we are getting enough cows and generating enough replacements within that period between the two calving blocks as well, I think any farmer that's calving in both in the autumn and the spring needs to try to keep it as tight as possible, that they're not doing something the whole year round then. That'd be my own view. Like I said, for the last few years, we would be happy enough if we could sort of keep it to 10, 11 weeks breeding and an empty rate of less than 10%. And it's even by de facto, you're sort of breeding out any ones that tend to cause problems. The other thing I would have seen over the last few years, you could probably breed for maybe 14 or 15 weeks, and the amount of cows that you will get in that last few weeks are like, you're probably only looking at maybe 2 or 3 cows or something. Well, our herd, there's only 150 cows in the whole herd anyway, so it's a very small number of cows for that observation. So just keep it a bit tighter, and when you do it for a couple of years, where we probably pulled it back as tight as we're going to go now at this stage, but we would have maybe been breeding for 12 weeks before and just trying to tighten it up a little bit the whole time. So.
And I think, as you say, there's it doesn't happen overnight, and you are maybe going to miss 1 or 2 cows, but as you say, they tend to be a problem cow in the herd, and they'll be late next year and the year after again. I think we've got a good update, Aidan, in terms of what's happening on the farm. It'll be interesting to see what the scanning results are across the spring herd, and again also what the cumulative performance will be in the autumn herd. Looking forward to catching up later in the year.
That's great, Emma-Louise. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to Aidan Lawless for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify, and for more information go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.